So it's okay. Dio, I wanted to start the conversation between the two of us just to take a second and to kind of pick your mind in a way, if you will, about Osama bin Laden and the fact that he was killed today. First question I have is, do you believe that Osama bin Laden was largely responsible for the attacks on September 11th?
Absolutely. I do think so. I think Osama bin Laden was responsible. He he took uh, ownership of it and actually did claim right after the attack that he was responsible. So by taking responsibility for it, he certainly was the guy who masterminded it.
I don't know. My understanding from different news sources was that he applauded the attacks, but didn't directly take responsibility for it personally. Was there credible news sources that said he, in fact, said, I did this, I had a hand in doing this?
Well, that's a good point. Good point, Elliot, because you're right. I guess I was paraphrasing from the so many arrays of news bits that we had heard around that time, 2001. But regardless, I mean, this guy certainly um, wanted it to happen, certainly had put his stamp of approval on it, and knew that the United States and the world at large were on a manhunt to get him ferreted out. And I don't know that he cared. Don't get me wrong, not like I'm thrilled when a man or woman dies, but this is a different kind of death. A lot of people hopefully are relieved.
I agree with you that Osama bin Laden was the mastermind of the September 11th attacks, and I think for whatever reason he applauded it, but didn't directly say he did it. But I believe he did it. If I could ask you a follow-up question, I hear a lot of claims that President George W. Bush had a hand in some way in the September 11th attacks. Do you believe that these claims are credible or valid in any way?
I don't know. It sounds incredible that the president of the United States would actually have a hand in it, but I don't think that is the case.
Okay. I don't know what to make of it. I've heard claims that George W. Bush, knew that September 11th was going to happen and, allowed it to happen. I'm not saying I endorse this, but that claims that he knew it was going to happen and he allowed it was going to happen. And the reason why is because he wanted us to be attacked in order to have justification for attacking an oil-rich country like
Mm.
Iraq in order to, gain access to oil cheaply and more efficiently. I tend to believe that these claims are false, but I am very startled when I see the former pictures of George W. Bush, really being friendly with Osama bin Laden, and I'm sure you've seen those pictures too, where bin Laden was shaking hands with Bush, and it was almost like they were poker buddies or something. You know what I mean? That they were on very friendly
Right.
terms. What do you make of bin Laden's prior relationship to George W. Bush?
Well, I'm not aware of the prior relationships to Bush himself, but certainly I'm aware of his prior relationships with the United States during the Soviet power era, to put it that way. And I certainly have seen pictures of Osama bin Laden with one or two other persons in George Bush's cabinet.
Okay,
Maybe not
talk,
Bush in
talk a little
particular, but it
louder if
doesn't
you could.
matter. Sure, absolutely. So I have seen some pictures of Osama bin Laden with one or two generals, if I recall, in George Bush's cabinet, not
Yes.
Bush himself. But it doesn't matter. It's Bush's tenure. That's what counts. Well, firstly, I don't really know that I have an opinion on whether presidents could concoct or allow such an event to occur. It is pretty. It's a dastardly thing to do, and it's pretty a serious
Yes.
thing to do. So I don't know that I'd say I believe that conspiracy theory, but I
Yes.
have heard of it before. I just want to keep um, disbelieving it.
Yes, I'm not really sold on the theory myself that George W. Bush had a hand in it. I know, lots of friends and other people I've talked to at bars or whatnot who said absolutely Bush is the real terrorist in this, and Bush is the reincarnation of Hannibal Lecter and these types of things. But I don't really believe that. One thing I am particularly swayed by in my thinking is I'm sure you know who Richard Clark is, right?
Yes, Rich Clark.
He used to
I
have
don't know who he is. I've heard of Rich Clark.
he used to have a position in the Bush cabinet, and then he resigned and he wrote a book in claiming that after the 9/11 attacks, he gave he wrote up a paper on it stating that Iraq in no way was responsible for the attacks. And when he presented this to President George W. Bush at the time, Bush um, really said, this is wrong, this is not correct. And Bush didn't directly say it, but he said he knew that Bush wanted him to give a report stating that Iraq was responsible, and Bush was ready right then and there to invade and attack Iraq without knowing whether there was credible intelligence that either Al Qaeda or Bin Laden were in Iraq at the time. That he had pre motives prior to 9/11 to wanting to attack Iraq, and that 9/11 gave him a reason to. And when I heard this thing about Richard Clark, I was kind of confused because Richard Clark himself said, I take some responsibility for this. Your government has failed you, and I have failed you as well, you know. And so I know a lot of critics say, oh, he was just trying to, he was trying to sell a book and get money. He was trying to do this. But when Richard Clark did this, he was already like, well into his 60s or 70s. He was an old man, and he already had
Why would he want to do that?
You know what I mean? But do you believe Richard Clark claim that Bush wanted to attack Iraq from the start without having completely credible intelligence is valid?
I mean, the question or issue about wanting to attack Iraq is almost moot. I mean, of course, who doesn't want to attack some dictator who would attack you first? And as you know, it's not like I'm a Bush lover.
Yes.
I'm not American. I don't believe in this decision making along party lines. But the truth here is the fact that 9/11 may have given Bush a reason to attack Iraq does not mean that Iraq was responsible for it. And we all know that the Iraq issue and 9/11 issue fundamentally are just two separate things. So I don't know that I have a qualified opinion per se on Rich Clark's assertion at the time, especially because I was new in the United States.
Yes.
I came to the United States in 2002, and may have been more thrilled with my schooling at the time than with what Rich Clark had to say. Nevertheless, the issue was a big deal all over the United States. I may not have followed it that closely, but I would certainly just want to make clear that I personally think Iraq and 9/11 are two different issues.
Yeah, I agree with you. Just to tie up my last point on Richard Clark was, Richard Clark was, a very credible moral person before this who had, a good reputation and made a career in politics, and was actually appointed by Ronald Reagan. So Ronald Reagan is as conservative as you get, and he thought highly enough of Richard Clark to appoint him to his post. So this makes me feel like Richard Clark, didn't say that in order to generate fire or backlash against any conservative agenda. And it just seems like there wouldn't be a motive for Richard Clark to take responsibility for it, say, I failed you, your government has failed you. Bush wanted us to go to Iraq without knowing the intelligence. It just seems, it seems like it doesn't really add up, in my opinion. But I don't know what it is. I'm sure, years from now, I hear, the older generation who, was our age in the 60s, give different theories about why we invaded Vietnam and, what we wanted to get out of it and should we have done this or that in Vietnam. And I'm sure, our generation, 20, 30 years from now, when we're older, are going to have the same discussions about the war on terror and the war in Iraq. And what do you think? What do you think about how this affects foreign policy in general? Do you? I tend to be more swayed by the foreign policy ideas of. I don't know if you're familiar with Ron Paul, who ran for president. Are you familiar with Ron Paul, Dio?
Sorry, Elias, I missed you briefly there for about 5 to 10 seconds.
Okay. Are you familiar with a man named Ron Paul who ran for president in the last election?
Well, why don't we talk about the euphoria in town, California here, and in DC, as regards Bin Laden's death? Um, don't get me wrong. The reason is, of course, I have heard of who Ron Paul is before.
Yes. Okay.
One or two things that he's said before. But aren't you pumped that we have tonight before us to talk about Bin Laden in particular?
I am,
Um,
dude. I
and
am. I had a couple beers to celebrate. I'm having another one, baby. Bud Light, drink of choice, baby. Let's all have a
nice
drink to
commercial right
celebrate.
there.
Mm.
Bud Light should call you up and give you 6 digits for that.
They should, man. They should. Maybe I'll get sponsorship. Like, the comedian Chelsea Handler? I believe
Yes, she's cool.
Grey Goose Vodka is paying her money to drink her booze. And when I heard about this, I'm
Right.
like, to endorse her booze and drink, and I'm like, man, someone's paying you money to drink booze? Like, how do I get in on that? You know what I mean? Like, how cool would that
That
be?
is cool.
Well, how did you
Right.
want to steer this conversation to, Dio? Do you
Well,
have any questions for
you know,
me?
yeah, absolutely. You and I, just wanted to talk about this. I wanted to know where you were
Okay.
when you heard about the news, your first reaction, and what followed afterwards.
I was at the gas station, filling up on gas. I went inside to pay the clerk money to put money on, I think it was pump number 2. And when I was in there, there was a
Whereabouts? Foster City?
Foster City,
Okay,
home of champions. And
there you go.
when I was in the little gas station kiosk area, I was gonna buy a snack. I think I bought like a carrot cake or something. And I saw behind on the TV said, breaking news: Osama bin Laden has been killed, has been captured. And I went, holy shit, man! We just got Obama. You know what I mean? And the guy's like, what are you
Nice.
talking? I'm like, look on the TV, man. We just got and killed Obama. And the woman in the store's like, oh my god! And it was cool. And it was like it wasn't anywhere near as spectacular as when I heard about 9/11 initially taking
Oh
place.
no.
That I will never forget those images of 9/11 if I live forever.
Wow.
That day was insane.
So where were you on 9/11, and how old were you, and what did you say to your parents and family and sister and your siblings, all of you?
Well, at the time I was 18 years old and I was a freshman at San Diego State University, and I was living in the dorm at the time, and I remember going to my morning, I think it was Astronomy 101 class. And when I was in the class, I went in maybe 10 or 15 minutes early. And I remember I heard some people behind me saying, "Oh yeah, man, did you hear about the World Trade Center?" And then other people were talking. They're like, "Yeah, I heard both World Trade Centers have been completely demolished, and terrorists hijacked airplanes and crashed them into the World Trade Center, and now the World Trade Center is they're both gone, and they attacked the Pentagon and all this stuff." And I had been to the World Trade Center in person. My family went on vacation to New York City, and I'd actually been inside of the World Trade Center to see them. and they're big ass buildings. They're not
Right.
like the buildings we have here. The World Trade Centers were humongous. And I thought,
Hmm.
holy man, I'm like, these people are all crazy. Like, how could anyone in the world completely level the World Trade Center? Those things can't go down. And then I remembered after my astronomy class, there was announcements that all classes had been canceled, everything had gone down, and I went back to my dorm area, and everyone at the time was just glued to whatever television set was turned on and available, and they were just watching the images of the planes crashing into the World Trade Center,
Hmm.
and it was like the whole world kind of stopped at that time, and it wasn't like everyone was just kind of watching it and just kind of almost in a daze, you know what I mean? Not really saying, "Oh, who's this guy in my dorm room watching my TV?" Or you know what I mean? Like people would be watching next to people they didn't even know and just be like, "Oh my God, how?" You know what I mean? And there was just this sort of
Right.
confusion, and it's weird that it happened 10 years ago, man. Time really flies.
Yeah. Yeah.
Where were
Right.
you? Tell me your story, Dio.
Right. 1 second. It's 12 a.m. or is it 12:05 a.m.
Yes,
here in California? So we have my little old clock.
awesome. Do you have a cuckoo
Right. So
clock or what is that, man? Chimes?
uh, from the 20s. Um,
You're old school, man.
uh, there you go. A friend woke me up. I I would say I had missed class then. Of course, I was like you at the time. I was actually 18,
Yes.
17, 18, getting ready to come to the United States. I had my admissions and was actually thinking of um, which of the offers I'd take, etc.
Hmm.
And somehow there was supposed to be a session at school that we'd attend, but I didn't show up. I remember having a headache and getting about 7 phone calls from friends because here I was, this American lover, right?
Yes,
And
yes.
my friends were like, "Dude, you should not go to America."
Okay.
I'm like, "Why shouldn't I go to America?" And they're saying, "Oh my God, no one is safe there. Even the president is currently hovering around the country because he was on a plane."
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah, yeah,
all
yeah.
that stuff. And somehow it took me forever just to turn on the telly to just get this presence of mind that the telly was where to go to because I was in shock and somehow I wanted to return like 3 different voicemails that I had and
Uh-huh.
and talk to the different people who told me that this other friend told them. It didn't just hit me that I should just turn on the telly, but when I did,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
boy was I shocked.
I bet, man. I was shocked
I
too.
mean,
I didn't know
it's
what was going on. I knew, I didn't know. I had a sick feeling in my stomach. I think
ah,
one thing about the 9/11 attacks that I find noteworthy is that the people who committed the 9/11 attacks died in the attacks themselves. Whereas, I mean, let's just say you take a serial killer, like John Wayne Gacy or Jeffrey Dahmer or who not, after we've convicted them and we bring them to justice, they have the ability to say, this is why I did it. This is what I was thinking. This
right.
is what I was doing. And, I think people get some sort of closure in having someone, be put on trial, be found guilty, and then be punished and we get to hear, why they did it, what they were thinking. But with these people in the 9/11 attacks, they they themselves killed themselves in the attacks. So I don't think we got the closure we were looking for. If you kind of get what I'm saying.
Right, and today, more or less, is that closure,
It is.
or let me
Well,
say
it
yesterday.
is that closure, and it is closure that we killed Bin Laden. I hope that Al Qaeda, crumbles and goes the way of the dinosaurs after Bin Laden dies. My gut instinct is that will not happen. But I like the fact that in the past 10 years there hasn't been any big terrorist activity on the United States.
Right, I think today certainly is a turning point and will send a message to the potential Bin Ladens, and hopefully many of them will rethink their intent. And
Absolutely, absolutely.
I'm very thrilled.
How long have we been talking for? Have you been timing it, or is there a way to see this on here?
No, no, we're soon going to add a tool that would allow us to actually track the time limits. In fact, we have to put in constraints so that people don't yak on and on and on for 20 hours and even forget
Absolutely,
what they're
absolutely.
doing. But anyway, yeah, it's been really nice talking to you. What are your plans for tonight? Just don't drink too much, but besides the little half bottle of alcohol you have there
Yeah.
left over, what are you
Well,
going
I
to
have
do
more in the
tonight?
fridge, but I'm gonna take it easy. I have work tomorrow at 1:30 in the afternoon. I'm selling mattresses, and I'm pretty successful these days. I've sold some mattresses.
Cool.
I enjoy it actually. I
I
enjoy sales.
know.
I love selling. It's not what I want to do forever, but it's a good
You can advertise yourself right here on Nyoombl. Who knows? You know, if this video goes viral and has 25 million views, with your eloquence and how coherent you are
yes.
at speech, perhaps someone might give you a call to help them sell bigger things than mattresses.
That
I'm
would be
serious.
cool. I mean I've always dreamed of being in talk radio or on talk television, and if this could get me there, I
There you go.
when I was a little kid, I wanted to be a game show host. I and people told me, yeah, you'd be a great game show host, and
You would. Look at you.
yeah,
Look
I
at
have the
you.
game
Looking
show host
all.
look. I do.
Yes, you do. Yes, you do.
Why
Anyway,
don't we
let's
let's
go
stop this
ahead.
one and let's do a new conversation on something else.
All right. Okay. All right. Take care. Thank you very much, Elliot.